So looking at data is in different forms. We can have the numeric data files. We can have the qualitative materials, the interview scripts, whether it is from the key informant interviews, the semi-structured informants, whether it is focus group discussions, all those narrations, storytelling, and the audios, the videos, the images, the geospatial information biometrics. All this is part of data, and data is global. It is everywhere. We interact with it, and it's the basis for decision making, for policies, and which are also geared towards meant to improve the health service delivery, among other benefits. So data is global in nature, and of course, being global in nature, then it has cross-border implications and regulations. And therefore, in most cases, research demonstrates that the regulatory precedents, in this case, is often set by data-rich and data-intensive developed countries. And as much as this is there, also we, as the global nature of data, and then we also, it has potential significant risks and responsibilities. So the question is then, how can data be used in an ethical and responsible way? Okay. So maybe just as to start off, to dive into this section, if we can have just three of us give us one word that comes on your mind when you think about data ethics, and just one word and how you think it's applied to data. If we can have just three of us, maybe you can put it on the chat, or if you can just tell us as we dive in. You have anybody who can give us one word related when you think about ethics, it comes on your mind? Just one word. And I'm not able to see anything on the chat. So just in case there's anything on chat or someone has raised a hand, kindly Joel or my colleague Daniel.
There's some few, there's somebody said confidentiality, there's law, there's respect, there's privacy from Boniface.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There's numbers. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Issues of privacy, confidentiality. Thank you. When we think about data ethics, and then there's a lot of words that come into our mind. And of course, it could be a positive word and it could be negative, but it depends on how you use it. So the issues of integrity, violations, the issues of accountability, and we look at this in details later. Responsibility, the consent, we look at how to obtain the consent, the mistakes, the errors that we may deliberately make. And you ask yourself, how can they impact the quality of data that we are collecting, and what does it mean for mental health and research and service delivery, which is a very sensitive area. Honesty, fairness, trust, transparency, morality, and privacy that you were mentioning, all are those keywords that will come into our mind when you think about data ethics. The issues of biasness, how do we eliminate them? Anonymity, or concealing the identity, the security issues, being objective in our research, and of course the protection aspects. They are all, the list is endless. So what does it then mean by data ethics? In this case, we are talking about the moral principles and the values that guide the data life cycle. We look at the data life cycle a bit later, but then this is basically the whole process. As a researchers, when we start thinking about planning on how to conduct our research, so the process of planning, getting those ethical approvals, data collection, the analysis, the processing, and the use, the sharing through storage, all those issues to do with storage and deletion. So those are morals and the principles that guide all this data life cycle. So data ethics basically help us to answer questions related to who owns this data that we are collecting, right? And then when we understand the data ownership, then that can also help us to to be able to comply, to understand how we need to protect the identity and all that. So we'll be able to interrogate, or rather link them to existing regulatory frameworks. So it will also help us to, answer a question related to how do we obtain the obtain content from data subjects? What are the benefits and the harms of using the data that we are collecting? How do we even ensure fairness, transparency in data practices? And we have different institutions, organizations, whether you are a controller or a processor of the data, then how do we even ensure the balance between the competing interests? between with the and the stakeholders. Okay, so we look at the issues, the principles of data ethics, and this forms the basis for responsible data management practices. And the key principles that we look at: the transparency. The issues of transparency in data ethics requires very clear communication, you as a researcher. So the data subject surely should understand from the word go, why do you want to collect the data from them? How is it going to be processed? It is a sensitive data. How is it the security of that data going to be, to be ensured? And what is the purpose? What is the use? What are you going to use it? So it has to be very, very transparent, and participants need to make decisions whether, therefore, they will decide to participate in the research or they will not participate. Okay, remember, it's also their right. The issues of fairness as a key principle of data ethics have to be very equitable in treatment of respondents during the data collection, processing, including use. That is the whole entire chain of the data life cycle, right? Equitable in terms of, considering those contextual factors, the social cultural issues dynamics. In some communities, for example, when you look at the issues of considering the issues of bias, you find that the cultural aspects will actually make them not even report the case. They will not come up to say that, hey, we have mental issues here in our home and all that. So we'll have a lot of under-reporting. And of course, for fear of stigmatization in the community, so it is very important for us to be fair in how we are handling, to really be keen about the principle of fairness as a principle of data ethics. And how do we also ensure there's the issues of joint designing of research tools? Then this can also help us to be fair in a data representation. So how do we mitigate, and also it will also help us to determine how we can then ask ourselves that how can we mitigate the biasness and promote fairness when we're collecting data. The issues of accountability when you're handling data should be unethically and in compliance with the existing regulations, which you're going to look at. And one, as a researcher, you have to understand your role as a researcher in data management and ensuring mechanisms for oversight, ensuring that it is compliant to the existing mechanisms or regulatory framework, so that we are able to ensure confidentiality, the integrity, the quality, the privacy of the data subjects. You have to take responsibility as a researcher or a data processor controller. We have to take responsibility for what happens in case of leaks, to avoid any potential harm to the data subject. So we have to take responsibility and put in place measures that will help to avoid such circumstances. How do we ensure accountability then? We can have issues such as monitoring, audits. When you are doing your research, you can just do monitoring to identify possible gaps and be able to mitigate them. Ensure that there is ethical standards, complying to the laid procedures. Individual agency, ability to make, as researchers or data subjects have the ability, they have a right to make choices about the personal information, participation, issues to do with the information, how the information to be shared and also stored. So you as a researcher, then it is also a responsibility for you to ensure that participants' rights, and the link provides to different rights given by the General Data Protection Regulations and, of course, among other existing regulations, and the well-being are safeguarded. The rights to access the data, the right to know how it's going to be used, the right to benefit from the data after it has been collected and all that. So how do we ensure that? Obtaining the informed consent becomes very important, which should be very clear, stipulating the voluntary participation of the participants, the privacy issues, the ownership, empower them, include them in joint designing of the research tools to make the process and help them to make informed decisions. Data privacy issues this is also very important, and protection from exposure of data to public, observe participants' privacy. And this will also protect the integrity, issues of stigmatization, loss of jobs, maybe benefits, employment related to that. So any personally identifiable information, information linked to participant has to really be protected in mental health research. The challenges, we are handling a lot of data and it's global in nature. So there are challenges, of course. whereby we have cases whereby hackers are able to actually retrieve individuals' information, even just using very little personal information. How to ensure that privacy is safeguarded or ensured? Then adhering to legal frameworks to ensure privacy is very important, so that we avoid possible penalties, right? Then finally, the issue of data quality, it's very important. Ensure that data used for analysis and decision making is very accurate, reliable, and up to date, so that we do not also mislead the policymakers, we do not mislead or end up having malfunctional interventions in health practices. So we look at the ethical considerations in sensitive health data, and sensitive health data, for example, information related to mental health, maybe the reproductive health issues to do with the drug abuse, maybe the medication and all that. It really requires demands protection against unauthorized access, and of course be able to safeguard the data subjects from possible consequences, right? So ethical considerations, we look at a few of them. The confidentiality, not overemphasize it. The participants sharing the information because they might trust and expect that the information they're sharing with us researchers is going to be protected. It's not going to be disclosed against their will. Confidentiality, this should actually be made clear in the introductory section when you're obtaining your consent from the data subject, and as laid out in the existing regulatory frameworks. Issues of informed consent, legal and ethical requirement. It is a legal and ethical requirement for us researchers to ensure that we obtain informed consent, particularly in this space of sensitive health data. And also, the data uses should be known when you're obtaining, tell them, as I mentioned before, and then there should be comprehensive consent and written information. In some cases, may have to put it down depending on the sensitivity of the data that you're dealing with. We have to be also very considerate when collecting the informed consent, issues of literacy, so that we are able to accommodate the people. They don't end up being coerced into signing into research that they do not understand. Literacy levels, and once you establish that, then put in place mechanisms that will be able to address this possible issue. The transfer of personal data as an ethical consideration, sensitive health data. So this is the transfer to third parties outside maybe the jurisdiction, outside your country, specific country, even outside the institutions, exchange between the different researchers. So they present legal and ethical considerations, and we have to be aware of that. So this must be in accordance with the informed consent. And of course, you should be able to, as a researchers, to consult the existing relevant regulations on the legitimacy of data transfer within particular jurisdictions. And we need to have data sharing agreements that can be able to help us in place. Anonymity should be able to conceal data subjects' identity, increase participants' confidence so that they are even able to become vulnerable and share, for you to be able to collect rich data that will inform policies and our practices in mental health. Then helps research this year helps to make the rich data resources available while safeguarding their privacy, and it's important for open access. Currently, right now, of course, increasingly, we require to make our data is supposed to be to be available, and of course most funders encourage that it is open access. So in this case, how do we ensure that the anonymity of the data participants, the subjects actually is protected? Data deletion and storage. Data can only be stored for intended purposes, retained for important purposes, including maybe auditing, and it should be used as such, only for intended purposes. Lack of deletion can lead to misuse and breach and repercussions. So in this case, you have to ensure that there is self-deleting of the data in any backups, whether it's in cloud, third-party service providers, and also ensure that the data that has been shared with partners and third parties has been deleted, unless they can only retain it if there is a legal basis for it, and if there is, of course, an agreement to that effect.